They buried Robert on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Margaret couldn't get into her own house. She stood on the front porch of the home her husband had built with his own hands 50 years ago, her arthritic fingers fumbling with the key that suddenly didn't fit. The lock was different. New, wrong. Margaret stepped back, her sensible black funeral dress still wrinkled from sitting in the church pew, and stared at the brass deadbolt that had replaced the one Robert installed in 1998. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 72 years old, and she'd never felt panic like this. Not when Robert shipped out to Vietnam in 1968, not during his 3 heart attacks, not even yesterday when they lowered his flag-draped coffin into the ground at the Veterans Cemetery. This was different. This was violation. The front door swung open and a man appeared. 30-something, heavily tattooed, wearing a stained tank top that showed off prison ink across his shoulders. He looked at Margaret like she was an inconvenience, a door-to-door salesman interrupting his afternoon. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with manufactured politeness. Margaret's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind him, she could see into her living room. Her living room. Except the furniture was wrong. Her grandmother's antique sofa was gone, replaced by a cheap leather sectional. The family photos that had lined the mantel for decades were missing. A flat-screen television she'd never seen before dominated the wall where Robert's Navy cross had hung in its shadow box. "This," Margaret finally managed, her voice shaking. "This is my house. What are you doing in my house?" The man smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Margaret's blood run cold. "Your house? Lady, I think you're confused. My girlfriend and I rent this place. Been here 3 weeks." "3 weeks?" Margaret's voice cracked. "I was here Monday morning. I've lived here for 50 years. A woman appeared behind him, bleached blonde hair and a messy ponytail, cigarette dangling from her lips. She looked Margaret up and down with open contempt. "Derek, what's going on?" "Some old lady thinks this is her house," Derek said, amusement in his voice. "I don't think," Margaret said, her hands trembling. "I know. My husband built this house. We raised 3 children here. I have the deed. This is my home." Derek reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded document. "We got a lease, lady. All legal. Signed by the property manager 3 weeks ago. Maybe you got the wrong address." Margaret stared at the paper he was waving. It looked official. Signatures, dates, even a notary stamp. But it was impossible. She owned this house outright. The mortgage had been paid off for 15 years. There was no property manager. There was no lease. "That's fake," she whispered. "That has to be fake. I need to call the police." "Go ahead," Derek said, leaning against the door frame. "We're not going anywhere. We got rights." Margaret fumbled for her phone, her vision blurring with tears. She dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The 2 patrol officers who arrived 20 minutes later were young enough to be her grandchildren. Officer Ramirez, a stocky man with kind eyes, and Officer Chen, a woman who looked barely old enough to vote. Margaret showed them everything: her driver's license with this address, her utility bills on her phone, the deed to the property, which she kept in her purse for the estate attorney she'd met with that morning. Then Derek produced his lease. The officers examined it carefully, their faces growing increasingly uncomfortable. "Ma'am," Officer Ramirez said quietly, and Margaret could hear the helplessness in his voice. "This is going to be classified as a civil matter. They have documentation claiming tenancy." "But it's fake," Margaret's voice rose. "I own this house. My name is on the deed." "I believe you," Ramirez said, his jaw tight. "But legally we can't remove them without a court order. They have a lease, even if it's fraudulent. You'll need to file for eviction. Go through the legal process." "Eviction?" Margaret felt the world tilting. "I have to evict people from my own house?" Officer Chen shifted uncomfortably. "California tenant protection laws are complicated. Even with fraudulent documentation, we can't physically remove them without a judge's order. It's to protect legitimate renters from illegal eviction." "How long will that take?" Margaret whispered. The pause told her everything. "Could be several weeks, maybe 2 months, depending on the court backlog and if they fight it." 2 months. Margaret's medication was inside that house, her clothes, Robert's ashes sitting on the mantel in the urn she'd picked out just 5 days ago. 50 years of memories, photographs, her children's baby books, her mother's wedding ring. In the meantime, Derek called from the doorway, that cruel smile still on his face. You're trespassing on our rental property. Might want to leave before we press charges. The blonde woman, whose name Margaret learned was Crystal, laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made Margaret want to weep. Come on, ma'am, Ramirez said gently, touching her elbow. Let me help you to your car. As he guided her down the porch steps, Margaret looked back at her house, the house where Robert had carried her over the threshold in 1974, where she'd brought home 3 babies, where she'd nursed Robert through cancer 5 years ago, where she'd kissed him goodbye for the last time 6 days ago. Wait, she said suddenly, pulling away from Ramirez. Robert's ashes, they're inside, on the mantel. I need them, please. Derek appeared in the doorway again. Yeah, about that. Your stuff's in the side yard. We needed the space for our things. Margaret rounded the corner of the house and stopped cold. Trash bags, dozens of black trash bags split open, contents spilling across the grass. She fell to her knees, hands scrabbling through the chaos. Her wedding dress, muddy and torn, Robert's purple heart lying in a puddle, photo albums with pictures bleeding in the dampness, her mother's china smashed, the quilt her grandmother had sewn, trampled and stained. My God, Officer Chen breathed behind her. Margaret found the urn near the fence, tipped over, the lid loose. Some of Robert's ashes had spilled onto the dirt. She clutched it to her chest, her whole body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. This is criminal destruction of property, Ramirez said, his voice hard. He turned to Derek, who was watching from the porch with amusement. We can arrest you for this. Prove it was us, Derek said. Maybe it was like that when we moved in. Maybe the old lady's lying about who owns the house and dumped that stuff herself for sympathy. Crystal appeared beside him, holding her phone up, clearly recording. Yeah, this old bitch is harassing us. We're the victims here. Got it all on video. Margaret looked at the 2 officers, at their angry, helpless faces, at the regulations that tied their hands. Then she looked at the trash bags containing 50 years of her life, treated like garbage. Officer Ramirez helped her load what she could salvage into her 2009 Honda Accord. The car Robert had bought used after his last heart attack, insisting they needed something reliable. The car that was now her home. That first night, parked 3 blocks away under a broken streetlight, Margaret sat in the driver's seat clutching Robert's urn and cried until she had nothing left. Her phone buzzed periodically. Her daughter Sarah calling from Oregon, asking how she was holding up after the funeral. Her son Michael checking in from Colorado. She couldn't answer. Couldn't explain that she was homeless, that strangers were sleeping in the bed where she'd made love to her husband for 5 decades. She didn't know it could get worse. She was wrong. The next morning, Margaret drove to the house at dawn. Maybe she could reason with them. Maybe in the daylight, with clear heads, they'd realize the cruelty of what they were doing. Maybe they'd just leave. Derek and Crystal were in the front yard having coffee. Her coffee, in her mugs, sitting in Robert's handmade porch chairs. Please, Margaret said, her voice hoarse from crying. Please, just go. I'll give you money, whatever you want. This house, it's all I have. My husband built it. He died 6 days ago. Derek looked at Crystal. They both burst out laughing. 6 days, Crystal said. Man wasn't even cold yet, and you're already trying to scam us out of our rental. I'm not scamming anyone, Margaret's voice broke. This is my home. Was your home, Derek corrected. He pulled out his phone and started filming. Check it out, guys. Crazy old lady is back, still trying to break into our house. This is what we deal with. Harassment every day. Margaret noticed he was live streaming on Facebook. Comments were already appearing. Some supportive, some skeptical, some cruel. Old people are so entitled. This is sad. Squatters are taking over California. I need my medication, Margaret pleaded. It's inside. I have a heart condition. Please just let me get my pills. Should have thought of that before you dumped all your stuff and tried to frame us, Crystal said, blowing cigarette smoke in Margaret's direction. A car pulled up. Mrs. Hernandez from next door. She'd lived there for 30 years, had been at Robert's funeral. She got out slowly, looking between Margaret and the squatters. Margaret? Mrs. Hernandez said uncertainly. What's happening? Rosa, please. Margaret turned to her old friend. Tell them this is my house. Mrs. Hernandez looked at Derek and Crystal, at their hard eyes and cruel smiles. Fear flickered across her face. I don't want trouble." "No trouble," Derek said pleasantly. "Just a confused old woman who needs to move along." Mrs. Hernandez got back in her car without another word. Margaret watched her oldest neighbor drive away, abandoning her. Over the next 3 days, Margaret learned the true meaning of powerlessness. She called lawyers. The cheap ones said they couldn't help. The expensive ones quoted retainer fees she couldn't afford, not on Robert's veterans' pension and Social Security. She called legal aid. They were backed up for 6 weeks just for an initial consultation. She slept in her car, parked in different spots each night to avoid tickets. Her back ached from the cramped seat. Her medication ran out. When she tried to retrieve more from inside, Derek called the police on her for trespassing. On the 4th day, Margaret watched from her car as Derek and Crystal threw a party. Her house filled with strangers, music blasting, beer bottles littering the yard Robert had maintained with such pride. At one point, Derek came outside carrying something metal and shiny. He held it up to show his friends. Robert's Navy Cross, the medal he'd earned for valor in Vietnam, the medal he'd kept in its case on the mantel, the one thing he'd been proud of from that terrible war. Derek made a show of examining it, then tossed it carelessly into the trash can by the curb. Margaret got out of her car, not thinking, just moving. She ran across the street, dug through the trash, found the medal covered in beer and cigarette ash. When she looked up, Derek was recording her again. "Look at this," he said to his phone. "Crazy lady going through our trash now. Someone call Adult Protective Services. She's clearly senile." His friends laughed. Someone threw a beer can at her. It hit her shoulder, soaking her dress. She clutched Robert's medal and stumbled back to her car. That night, parked behind a grocery store, Margaret looked at herself in the rearview mirror. She looked like a stranger. Hollow-eyed, unwashed, defeated. Her hands shook constantly now from missing her heart medication. She'd lost 8 pounds in 4 days. Her phone buzzed. A text from her grandson, James, Robert's youngest grandchild, 23 years old, working construction in San Diego. "Grandma, Mom said you're not answering. Are you okay?" Margaret stared at the message. She couldn't lie anymore. Her fingers trembled as she typed back the truth. Everything. The squatters, the police saying it was civil, sleeping in her car, Robert's medals in the trash. James called immediately. "Grandma, why didn't you tell anyone?" "I didn't want to burden you children," Margaret whispered. "You all have your own lives." "We're coming," James said. "Mom and Uncle Michael and me, we're getting you out of that car." "No," Margaret said firmly. "Your mother is dealing with her father's death. Michael has his job. You can't all drop everything because some criminals stole my house." "Then what are you going to do?" Margaret looked at the trash bags in her back seat, at Robert's urn on the passenger seat, at the future she couldn't see anymore. "I don't know, baby. I just don't know." James was quiet for a long moment. "Grandma, didn't Grandpa used to ride with a motorcycle club back in the day?" Margaret blinked. She'd almost forgotten. So long ago it seemed like another lifetime. The Road Warriors. He founded it in 1973. Why? "Because I'm going to make a video, and I'm going to post it everywhere, and I'm going to mention that my grandfather, Robert Thunder Matthews, founding member of the Road Warriors MC, would be devastated to see his widow treated like this." "James, I don't think—" "Grandma, trust me. Just trust me." 2 hours later, James's video went live. It showed Margaret looking small and broken in her car. It showed the house Robert built. It showed Derek's Facebook live stream, his cruel mocking, the trash bags of destroyed belongings. James spoke directly to the camera, his voice shaking with rage. "My grandfather served his country. He built that house with his own hands. He died 6 days ago. And my grandmother is sleeping in her car while criminals throw parties in her home. Robert Matthews was a founding member of the Road Warriors MC. He was a Marine. He was a good man. And this is what happens to his widow?" James posted it to every platform he could find. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. He tagged local news stations, veterans organizations, and motorcycle club pages. Then he added one more line. "The Road Warriors MC, if you're out there, Thunder's family needs you." The video started spreading. 10 shares, 50, 100. By midnight, It had been viewed 8,000 times. Margaret fell asleep in her car, unaware that 300 miles away, a man named Jackson Mills was about to see it. A man who owed Robert Matthews his life. A man who had the power to mobilize an army. Jackson Mills was 3 beers deep when his phone buzzed at 11:47 that Friday night. He almost ignored it. The Phoenix clubhouse was loud, filled with road warriors celebrating a successful charity ride that had raised $32,000 for veteran suicide prevention. Bikes lined up outside like a chrome army. Brothers and sisters laughing, telling stories, living the life Robert Matthews had envisioned when he founded this brotherhood 50 years ago. But something made Jackson look at his phone, a text from his VP, Marcus Hammer Stone. "You need to see this, now." The video link loaded slowly. Jackson moved away from the noise, stepping outside into the desert night. He pressed play. The first thing he saw was an old woman sitting in a car, looking like she'd aged 100 years overnight. Then James spoke, and Jackson heard the name that made his blood run cold. Robert "Thunder" Matthews. Jackson's hand tightened around his phone. The video continued. The house. Jackson knew that house. He'd been there 100 times, had learned to rebuild his first engine in that garage, had sat at that kitchen table while Margaret fed him pot roast and told him he could be more than the angry kid everyone had written off. The video showed Derek mocking her, showed Robert's medals in the trash, showed Margaret broken and homeless while strangers partied in the home Thunder had built board by board. Jackson watched it 3 times. By the third viewing, his hands were shaking with a rage so pure it felt like ice in his veins. He walked back inside and climbed onto the bar, his boots loud on the wood. The room went silent immediately. When Reaper stood on the bar, you listened. "Thunder's dead," Jackson said, his voice cutting through the sudden quiet. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Jackson raised his hand, and silence fell again. "He died 6 days ago. And I didn't know because I've been out here, living my life, while the man who founded this club, the man who saved half our lives, was being buried without his brothers around him." Jackson's jaw clenched. "And now his widow is sleeping in her car because scumbag squatters stole the house Thunder built, the house where he started this whole thing, where he taught us what brotherhood means." He held up his phone, playing the video on the bar's sound system. The room watched in absolute silence. By the end, several members had tears in their eyes. Others looked ready to commit violence. "Church," Jackson said simply. "Right now, every member. I don't care if you're drunk, if you're tired, if you had other plans. Thunder's old lady needs us. We ride at dawn." The church meeting room filled within minutes. 43 members of the Phoenix chapter, plus a few from the Tucson contingent who'd come up for the party. Jackson stood at the head of the table, the president's gavel in his hand, but he didn't sit. Couldn't sit. Not for this. "Some of you are new," Jackson began. "You don't know the history. So let me tell you about Robert Matthews." He walked to the wall where a faded photograph hung. 1973, 12 men on motorcycles, young and wild and free. Robert stood in the center, grinning at the camera, his arm around a skinny 18-year-old kid with haunted eyes. That kid was Jackson. "I was 17 when I met Thunder," Jackson said quietly. 1992. I'd just gotten out of juvie for the second time. My old man drank himself to death when I was 12. My mom was gone. I was angry at everything, headed straight for prison or a grave." He touched the photo. "Thunder found me trying to steal his motorcycle from outside a bar. He caught me, and instead of calling the cops or beating my ass, he asked me if I knew how to ride. I said no. He said, 'Then I guess I'm going to teach you.'" Marcus spoke up from his seat. "Thunder was special. Anyone who knew him knew that." "He was more than special," Jackson continued. "He was the real deal. Marine Corps, 2 tours in Vietnam, came back with medals and nightmares, started the Road Warriors because he said veterans needed brotherhood after the war ended. Needed a family that understood." Jackson's voice grew stronger. "But he didn't just start a club. He built something that mattered. When I was 18, heading down the same path that killed my dad, Thunder sat me down in that house and said, 'You can keep being angry, or you can channel it into something that helps people.' He got me into a trade school, taught me mechanics, gave me purpose." He looked around the room at faces he'd known for decades. How many of you have a Thunder story? How many of you are here because he pulled you back from the edge? Hands went up around the table. More than half the room. He saved my marriage, said Linda Phoenix Torres. Counseled me and my husband for 6 months when we were ready to divorce. Wouldn't take no for an answer. He paid for my kid's surgery, added David Wrench Coleman. $12,000 out of his own pocket. Never asked for it back. He wrote letters to the parole board for me, Marcus said. Convinced them I was worth a second chance. I'd be in prison right now if not for Thunder. The stories continued, each one a testament to a man who'd built a brotherhood, not on rebellion or outlaws, but on second chances and loyalty in doing right by people who needed help. Margaret doesn't know most of this, Jackson said when the room fell quiet again. Thunder never bragged, never made a show of the good he did, but we know, we all know. He slammed the gavel down. So here's what's happening. I'm calling every chapter, every single Road Warriors club from California to Florida. Thunder founded this brotherhood 50 years ago. Now we're going to show those squatter pieces of trash what happens when you disrespect a founding member's widow. Jackson pulled out his phone and opened the OAS National Chapter President's Group Chat. 14 chapters across 7 states. His thumbs flew across the screen. Emergency call. Thunder Matthews founder died 6 days ago. His widow is being victimized by squatters. House is in Riverside, California. Address attached. We ride to defend her. This isn't optional. This is family. Who's with me? He hit send and waited. The responses came like thunder. San Antonio chapter president Carlos Diablo Ruiz. Thunder got my brother off drugs in '98. Saved his life. We ride. 37 bikes confirmed. Memphis chapter president William Preacher Jones. Thunder helped build our clubhouse in 2003, drove 16 hours to swing a hammer with us, 29 bikes rolling out tomorrow. Atlanta chapter president Teresa Viper, Washington. Thunder spoke at my father's funeral, full military honors because he made the calls, 42 members confirmed. Denver chapter president Robert Jr. Matthews. That's my uncle. I'm already packing, 51 bikes. Phoenix chapter president Miguel Santo Rodriguez. Thunder founded the Arizona charters. We owe him everything. 63 riders ready. The confirmations kept coming. Portland, Las Vegas, Albuquerque, Oklahoma City, Dallas, Houston, Birmingham, Jacksonville, each chapter president sharing their own Thunder story, each one committing every available rider. By 2 in the morning, the count was staggering. 587 confirmed riders. Jackson stared at his phone, his throat tight. Thunder had touched so many lives, had built something so strong that decades later, hundreds of people would drop everything to defend his widow. We need legal, Marcus said, always practical. Can't just roll up and intimidate them. Need to do this right. Jackson nodded and made another call. Gerald Chain. Morrison answered on the second ring, sounding groggy. This better be life or death, Reaper. It is. Thunder's dead. Squatters took his house, widow's sleeping in her car. The line went silent for a long moment. Chain had been a road warrior in the 90s before getting his law degree. He still wore his cut to every club event, but now he was one of the best real estate attorneys in California. Address, Chain said, suddenly wide awake. Jackson gave it to him. He could hear Chain's computer starting up, keys clicking. Okay, pulling county records now. Property deed shows Margaret Matthews as sole owner. Paid off. No liens, no mortgages. Taxes current. More clicking. This should be simple. Who are the squatters? Derek and Crystal. No last names yet. On it, I'll run every database I have access to. If these people have a pattern, I'll find it. Chain paused. Thunder was at my law school graduation. Told me to use my degree to help people who couldn't help themselves. I've been waiting for a case like this. How fast can you move? Emergency eviction hearing can happen. Within 72 hours if I prove fraud and immediate danger to the property owner's well-being. With 500 bikers descending on Riverside, I think I can make that argument. Jackson smiled grimly. We roll out at dawn. Meet us there? Already booking my flight. And Reaper? We're going to destroy them. Legally. Completely. By 4 in the morning, Jackson had coordinated with all 14 chapter presidents. The plan was military precise. The Los Angeles and San Diego chapters would arrive first, establishing a perimeter. Phoenix and Vegas would come in second wave, bringing supplies. The Texas and Southern chapters would arrive by evening, ensuring round-the-clock presence. But there was one more thing Jackson needed to do. At 5:30, as the sun began painting the desert pink and gold, Jackson rode alone toward Riverside. He'd sent Marcus to coordinate with the other chapters. This conversation needed to be private. He found Margaret's Honda Accord in a hospital parking lot, just like James's video had shown. She was asleep in the driver's seat, her head at an awkward angle that made Jackson's heart hurt. Robert's urn sat in the passenger seat like a silent guardian. Jackson parked his bike and approached slowly. He tapped gently on the window. Margaret jerked awake, terror in her eyes, then confusion. She rolled down the window a crack, her hand shaking. "Who are you?" Jackson pulled off his sunglasses. "My name is Jackson Mills, but Thunder called me Reaper. I'm the current president of the Road Warriors MC." Margaret's eyes widened. Recognition flickered across her face. Jackson? Little Jackson who Robert taught to ride? "Not so little anymore," Jackson said with a sad smile. "But yes, ma'am, that's me." Margaret's face crumpled. "Robert talked about you all the time. He was so proud of you. You run a custom motorcycle shop now, right? He showed me pictures." "Yes, ma'am. Thunder's the reason I have that shop, the reason I'm not in prison or dead." Jackson crouched down so he was eye level with her. "I'm so sorry about Thunder, and I'm even sorrier that you've been dealing with this alone." "How did you know?" "Your grandson James made a video, tagged the club. It's been seen by every Road Warriors chapter in the country." Jackson pulled out his phone and showed her the group chat, the hundreds of confirmations, the commitments from strangers who loved the man her husband had been. Margaret stared at the screen, her hand over her mouth. "I don't understand. All these people?" "Thunder founded the Road Warriors in 1973. But he didn't just start a club. He built a family, a real family that takes care of its own." Jackson's voice grew firm. "Your family, Margaret. Thunder's widow. That makes you sacred to us." "But I don't even ride. I barely knew about the club." "Doesn't matter. Thunder kept his club life and his home life separate because he wanted to protect you and the kids, but he talked about you all the time, showed us pictures, bragged about your cooking." Jackson smiled. "Half the original members fell in love with you through his stories." Margaret wiped her eyes. "What's going to happen?" "At dawn, the first wave arrives. 50 bikes from LA and San Diego. By noon, another 100 from Phoenix and Vegas. By tonight, 587 riders will be surrounding that house." Jackson's expression hardened. "Those squatters think they can disrespect Thunder's memory. They're about to learn different." "I don't want violence," Margaret said quickly. "Robert always said the club wasn't about fighting." "It's not. Thunder taught us to be smart, to use our heads." Jackson pulled out another phone number. "This is Gerald Morrison. We call him Chain. He's our attorney. Former member, went to law school. He's filing emergency paperwork right now. We're going to evict those criminals the legal way." "But the police said it would take months." "That's before 500 bikers showed up with cameras, lawyers, and a media circus. Trust me, Margaret, when we make this public, when every news station in California is covering it, things move faster." Margaret looked at him with hope and fear warring in her eyes. What if they destroy more of Robert's things? What if they hurt the house? "They won't get the chance. We're setting up a perimeter today, 24/7 presence. They won't be able to sneeze without us documenting it." Jackson's voice gentled. "You're not alone anymore. You're about to have the biggest family reunion you've ever seen." "I can't pay you all." "Thunder already paid us. Every single one of us owes him. Some owe him their lives. Others owe him their families, their sobriety, their freedom." Jackson stood. "This isn't about money. This is about honor. This is about showing the world that when you mess with a Road Warriors family, there are consequences." Margaret opened her car door and stood slowly, her movements stiff from days of sleeping in cramped quarters. She was shorter than Jackson remembered, more fragile, but her eyes held the same strength Thunder always talked about. "When Thunder and I got married, he promised me he'd always protect me," she said softly. "Even after he got sick, he made me promise I'd be okay. I felt like I'd failed him these past few days, like I'd let him down. Jackson shook his head firmly. You didn't fail anyone. The system failed you. Those criminals failed basic human decency. But Thunder? He gestured to the urn in the car. Thunder's keeping his promise right now. He built something that lasts beyond death, a brotherhood that protects its own, always. He pulled out a leather cut from his saddlebag. It was smaller, fitted for a woman, with careful embroidery on the back. Road Warriors MC arched across the top, below it a memorial patch, property of Thunder, forever protected by the pack. This was Thunder's idea, actually, Jackson said. Back in '98, he had cuts made for all the founding members' wives. Said if something happened to him, you'd all still be family, still be protected. He held it out. Margaret Matthews, on behalf of the Road Warriors Motorcycle Club, I'm asking you to wear this, to let us be your family, to let us honor Thunder's memory by keeping his promise. Margaret took the cut with trembling hands. She held it to her chest and the dam finally broke. She sobbed, not the quiet tears of grief, but the raw, ugly crying of someone who'd been holding everything together and finally felt safe enough to fall apart. Jackson pulled her into a hug, this tiny woman who'd been Thunder's whole world, and let her cry against his leather vest. I've got you, he said quietly. We've got you. Thunder's riding with us now, and we're about to remind those squatters that some families don't stand alone. In the distance, Jackson heard it. The rumble of engines, the first wave arriving right on schedule. The Road Warriors were coming home, and they were bringing hell with them. The rumble started at 6:47 in the morning, low and distant like approaching thunder. Mrs. Hernandez woke first, confused by the vibration rattling her windows. She pulled back her curtains and gasped. They came from every direction, a river of chrome and leather flowing toward Oak Ridge Drive. The Los Angeles chapter led the procession, 53 bikes in perfect V formation, their engines synchronized like a heartbeat. Behind them, San Diego rolled in with 49 riders, American flags mounted on their bikes snapping in the morning breeze. Then, Phoenix, Vegas, Tucson, each chapter arriving in disciplined waves. By 7:15, the street was completely transformed. Motorcycles lined every available space in military precision, row after row, bike after bike, until Oak Ridge Drive and every connecting street for 3 blocks was lined with chrome that caught the rising sun and turned it into fire. Margaret stood beside Jackson's bike, wearing the cut he'd given her, watching with tears streaming down her face as the brotherhood her husband had founded materialized before her eyes. The numbers kept climbing. 50 bikes, 100, 200. They kept coming. How many? She whispered. Jackson checked his phone. 593. Still waiting on the Alabama and Florida chapters. They hit weather delays. 593. Margaret's legs nearly gave out. Inside the house, Derek stood at the window, his face draining of all color. Crystal appeared beside him, her earlier bravado completely gone. What the hell is this? Crystal's voice pitched high with panic. I don't know, Derek said, but his hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. This is insane. This can't be legal. The bikers began dismounting. Not chaotically, this was organized. Veterans moved to the front line, carrying American flags and standing at attention. Women formed a secondary perimeter. Camera operators from within the club set up professional equipment. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, intimidating in its precision. Jackson climbed onto the bed of a pickup truck someone had positioned across the street from Margaret's house. He raised his hand, and 593 people fell absolutely silent. My name is Jackson Mills, president of the Road Warriors Motorcycle Club. His voice carried across the street like a command. 50 years ago, Robert Thunder Matthews founded this brotherhood. He built something that stands for honor, loyalty, and protecting those who can't protect themselves. The crowd murmured agreement, a low rumble that made the ground vibrate. Thunder died 6 days ago, Jackson continued, his voice hardening. And his widow, Margaret Matthews, has been sleeping in her car because criminals with forged documents stole the house Thunder built with his own hands, the house where he started this club, where he taught us what family means. Angry shouts erupted from the assembled bikers. We're not here for violence, Jackson raised his hands. Thunder taught us to be smart, to use our heads, to do things the right way. He pulled out a document. We have lawyers, we have evidence, we have cameras documenting everything, and we're going to stand here, legal and peaceful, until Margaret Matthews gets her home back. The crowd roared approval, the sound deafening. A white van screeched to a halt at the end of the street. Channel 7 News. A reporter and cameraman spilled out, already filming. Then Channel 4. Then Channel 12. Within 20 minutes, 5 news crews had set up equipment, their helicopters circling overhead like mechanical vultures. Lisa Chen from Channel 7 pushed through to Jackson, microphone extended. Mr. Mills, can you explain what's happening here? Justice, Jackson said simply. Margaret Matthews is a 72-year-old widow whose husband served 2 tours in Vietnam. She owns this house free and clear. Criminals moved in while she was burying her husband, and now she's homeless. We're here to make sure she gets her home back. Are you concerned this could be seen as intimidation? We're standing on public property. We're not breaking any laws. We're just making sure the world sees what's happening. Jackson gestured to Margaret, who stood nearby looking overwhelmed. That's a veteran's widow sleeping in her car. Where's the intimidation? The real crime is what those squatters did to her. Lisa turned her camera toward the house. Derek had appeared at the window, filming on his phone. Sir, would you like to comment? Derek opened the window. This is harassment. We're legal tenants and this motorcycle gang is trying to terrorize us into leaving. Gang? Jackson's voice went cold. We're a motorcycle club. 70% of our members are veterans. We run charity rides for children's hospitals and homeless veterans. We're tax-paying citizens exercising our First Amendment rights. A biker named Sarah Doc Williams stepped forward. She was 58, gray hair and a braid, wearing scrubs under her cut. I'm an emergency room nurse, been a road warrior for 23 years. Robert Matthews paid for my nursing school when my husband died and left me with 3 kids. I'm here because I owe him my career and my children's future. Another biker joined her. Marcus Hammer. Stone, 6'4" and built like a mountain. I'm a high school teacher. Robert kept me from going back to prison 15 years ago. Helped me get my teaching credential. I'm here because he saved my life. One by one, bikers stepped forward with their stories. The college professor, the small business owner, the mechanic who ran his own shop, the grandmother of 8, each one sharing how Thunder had changed their trajectory, given them second chances, built them into better people. The news cameras captured everything. By 9 in the morning, the story had gone viral. Social media exploded. Hashtags trending nationwide. Justice for Margaret, road warriors, squatters out. The video James had posted was being shared thousands of times per minute. News networks were picking up the story for their morning broadcasts. Inside the house, Derek was spiraling. He'd called his lawyer, a sleazy attorney named Vic Brenner who specialized in tenant rights cases. Brenner had assured him they were untouchable. The law was on their side. But Brenner hadn't counted on this. There's hundreds of them, Derek said into his phone, his voice rising. News helicopters. This is on TV. You said this was a simple civil case. It is, Brenner said, but he sounded uncertain. They can't touch you. You have a lease. Just stay inside and don't engage. Derek hung up and turned to Crystal. We need to control the narrative. Make them look like the bad guys. He started filming a Facebook Live video, pointing the camera at the sea of bikers outside. This is what's happening in America today. Legal tenants being terrorized by a criminal motorcycle gang. Look at this intimidation. We have rights. We have a legal lease. But because we're not wealthy, because we can't afford fancy lawyers, we're being victimized. The comment section immediately erupted, but not the way Derek expected. You stole a widow's house while she was at her husband's funeral, scumbag. Those bikers are heroes. You're a criminal. Hope you rot in prison. Thunder's widow deserves justice. Derek's face reddened. He tried again, posting to multiple platforms, painting himself as the victim. But every post got ratioed immediately, buried under thousands of comments supporting Margaret. Meanwhile, Chain had arrived. Gerald Morrison walked through the sea of bikers like Moses parting the Red Sea, his expensive suit and leather briefcase contrasting sharply with the cuts and denim around him. But every single biker knew who he was. Knew he was one of them. He found Jackson and Margaret near the front line. "I've got good news and I've got ammunition." "Talk to me," Jackson said. Chain pulled out his tablet. "Derek Sanderson and Crystal Brooks. They're professional squatters. I found 12 properties in 5 years across 4 states. They target vulnerable people, elderly, grieving families, people unlikely to fight back. They move in with forged documents, drag out the eviction process. Sometimes they even sell the victim's belongings while they wait." Margaret made a small sound of horror. "It gets better," Chain continued grimly. "Derek has 3 outstanding warrants: fraud in Nevada, identity theft in Oregon, and a failure to appear in Arizona on a previous squatting case. Crystal has 2 warrants, both for fraud. The man they're calling their landlord on the forged lease doesn't exist. The notary stamp? Stolen from a Sacramento office 8 months ago." "Can you use this?" Jackson asked. "I filed an emergency motion this morning with Judge Patricia Alvarez. She's seen the news coverage. She's reviewing the evidence now." Chain checked his watch. "I should hear back within 2 hours. But based on the criminal warrants alone, I can get the sheriff to arrest them the moment they step outside." "They won't come outside," Marcus said. "They know they're trapped." "Then we wait," Jackson said. "We document everything, every move they make, every law they break. We give the judge no choice but to act immediately." What followed was the most organized siege Margaret had ever seen. The Road Warriors had clearly done this before, though Jackson later explained they usually targeted drug dealers who set up near schools, using legal pressure and public exposure to drive them out. Members with police backgrounds coordinated documentation. Every angle of the property was photographed, videoed, time-stamped. Former military members established a perimeter schedule, ensuring 24/7 coverage and shifts. The media team handled reporters, giving interviews that painted Derek and Crystal as the criminals they were. Neighbors began emerging from their houses. Mrs. Hernandez approached Margaret with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I was afraid. But seeing all these people here for you, Robert would be so proud." "It's okay, Rosa," Margaret said, hugging her old friend. Mr. Patterson from 2 doors down brought coffee from his house, passing cups to bikers. "Robert helped me rebuild my garage in 2007 after the fire. Wouldn't take a dime. Said neighbors help neighbors. Least I can do is bring coffee." By noon, the street had transformed into a community gathering. Someone brought a food truck, donating proceeds to Margaret's legal fund, which had now reached $68,000. Families came out to show support. Children drew chalk messages on the sidewalk. "Justice for Mrs. Margaret." "Thunder's house. Heroes ride bikes." Inside the house, Derek was losing his mind. Every window showed bikers, every direction leather and chrome. The constant rumble of engines, even at idle, created a psychological pressure that was crushing. He tried to leave once, around 1 in the afternoon, opened the door, looked at the wall of cameras and bikers and news crews, and retreated immediately. Crystal was crying. "I can't do this. Derek, we need to just go. This isn't worth it." "We have rights," Derek insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. At 2:37, Derek made the mistake that would destroy him. Margaret had been standing near the front line, talking to a reporter about Robert, about their 50 years together, about the house he'd built. She was composed, dignified, even managing to smile as she shared memories. "I just want to go home," she said softly to the camera. "I want to sleep in my own bed. I want to have Robert's ashes on the mantel where they belong, where he can watch over the house he loved." Derek, watching from the window, snapped. He threw open the front door and stormed onto the porch, his phone filming. "You want your precious ashes?" he screamed. "Here." He disappeared inside, emerged carrying the urn, and before anyone could react, he opened it and dumped Robert's ashes over the porch railing into the flower bed. "There's your war hero," Derek shouted. "Fertilizer for my garden." The silence that followed was absolute. 593 people went completely still. Even the news crews froze, cameras still rolling but the operators too shocked to move. Margaret's legs gave out. Jackson caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her gently as she stared at her husband's ashes scattered in the dirt. A sound came from her throat that wasn't quite a scream, more like something breaking inside. "Did you get that?" Chain's voice cut through the silence, cold and precise. Tell me every camera got that." "Got it," said 3 different voices. Derek seemed to realize what he'd done. His face went from triumphant to terrified in seconds. "I didn't. I mean, it was an accident. Desecration of human remains," Chane said, already typing on his phone. "That's a felony in California. Penal Code Section 229, up to 3 years in prison." Jackson helped Margaret to her feet. Tears streamed down her face, but her expression had transformed from grief to rage. "I want them out," she said, her voice shaking. "I want them arrested. I want them to pay for what they've done to Robert's memory." "They will," Jackson promised. "I guarantee it." Derek tried to close the door, but Marcus moved forward, not threatening, just standing at the base of the porch steps. "You just committed a felony on camera in front of 6 news crews and 500 witnesses. I'd stay right where you are if I were you." Chane's phone rang. He answered, listened, and smiled like a shark. "Judge Alvarez just saw the video. It's already on every news channel. She's issuing an emergency order right now." He looked at Derek with contempt. "You just gave us everything we needed. Thank you for being predictable." Within 10 minutes, 3 sheriff's vehicles arrived, not because of the bikers, but because Chane had sent Judge Alvarez's clerk the video of Derek desecrating Robert's remains. Deputy Martinez stepped out, the same officer who'd been helpless days earlier. But now he had paperwork. Now he had authority. "Derek Sanderson and Crystal Brooks," he called out. "You're under arrest for felony desecration of human remains, fraud, and outstanding warrants in 3 states. You have the right to remain silent." Derek tried to retreat inside. 2 more deputies blocked the door. The arrest happened on Margaret's front porch, with 593 bikers watching in absolute silence. Derek screaming about his rights, Crystal sobbing, deputies reading Miranda warnings while news helicopters captured every moment. As they were walked to the patrol cars in handcuffs, Marcus spoke quietly. "Robert's watching, and he's smiling." The patrol cars pulled away. The moment they disappeared, 593 bikers erupted in triumph. Engines revved, horns blasted, people cheered and embraced. But Margaret stood in front of her house, looking at Robert's ashes scattered in the flower bed, and wept. Jackson knelt beside her with a small wooden box. "We're going to collect every grain we can find. We'll do it right, with respect, with love. Can we really get them all? We'll try, and what we can't get, we'll leave here, in the garden he planted, protecting the house he built." Jackson helped her stand. "Thunder's home, Margaret, in every way that matters, and so are you." Chane approached with his phone. "Judge Alvarez granted emergency possession. The house is yours effective immediately. Sheriff's doing a sweep now to make sure no one else is inside. Then you can go home." Home. The word felt foreign and familiar all at once. 15 minutes later, Deputy Martinez emerged from the house with the all clear. He walked to Margaret and held out a key ring. "Your house, Mrs. Matthews. I'm sorry it took this long." Margaret took the keys with shaking hands. She looked at her front door, at the house Robert built, at the 593 people who'd come from across the country because her husband had mattered. "Would you like us to wait?" Jackson asked gently. "Give you privacy?" Margaret shook her head. "No, your family, Thunder's family. I want you to come home with me." She walked up the porch steps, put the key in the lock, and opened the door to the house she thought she'd lost forever. The road warriors followed her inside, ready to restore what had been taken. The real work was about to begin. The house was worse than Margaret had imagined. She stood in her own living room, a space she'd decorated with love over 50 years, and didn't recognize it. The hardwood floors Robert had refinished 3 times were scuffed and stained. Cigarette burns marked the coffee table he'd built by hand. Her grandmother's china cabinet had been emptied, the dishes nowhere to be found. The walls were dingy, marked with handprints and mysterious stains, but it was the smell that broke her heart. Cigarettes, marijuana, stale beer, and neglect. The smell of strangers who'd treated her sanctuary like a crash pad. Jackson stood beside her, his jaw tight. "We'll fix this. All of it." Margaret walked through each room like a ghost touring her own haunted past. The kitchen where she'd made 50 Thanksgiving dinners had dirty dishes piled in the sink, rotting food on the counters. Her bedroom, the one she'd shared with Robert, had unmade sheets she'd never seen before. Someone had spray-painted graffiti on the bathroom wall. In Robert's workshop, his tools were scattered and broken. The workbench where he'd taught their grandson to build birdhouses was covered in beer cans and drug paraphernalia. Margaret picked up Robert's favorite hammer, the handle worn smooth by decades of use, and clutched it to her chest. How could anyone do this to someone's home? Because they're predators, Chane said from the doorway. They don't see homes, they see opportunities. But we're about to make sure they never do this again. His phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression transformed into something predatory. Judge Alvarez will see us tomorrow morning at 9. Emergency hearing. She's calling it urgent matter of wrongful possession and criminal fraud. Apparently, the video of Derek dumping Robert's ashes has been viewed 3.2 million times in the past 4 hours. The DA's office is getting hundreds of calls demanding prosecution. Will Margaret need to testify? Jackson asked. Yes, but it'll be worth it. I've got everything we need to bury these criminals. Chane pulled out his tablet. I've been documenting their pattern. 12 victims in 5 years. Most were elderly or grieving. None had the resources to fight back effectively, until now. Margaret set down the hammer carefully. I want to be there. I want to look them in the eye and tell the judge what they did. You'll get your chance, Chane promised. That night, Margaret slept in her own bed for the first time in a week. Jackson and several other members had stripped the sheets Derek and Crystal had used, burned them in the backyard, and put on fresh linens from a set still in Margaret's linen closet. Doc Williams, the ER nurse, had retrieved Margaret's medications from inside, along with clean clothes and toiletries. The road warriors set up camp in shifts outside. No one was leaving until this was completely finished. Food trucks rotated through, donating meals. A member who owned a portable shower company brought units so people could clean up. Someone set up a medical tent where Doc could treat minor injuries and check blood pressure for the older members. The street had transformed into a temporary village, all centered around protecting one widow's right to her own home. At 8:45 the next morning, Margaret walked into the Riverside County Courthouse wearing her best dress, the one she'd worn to Robert's funeral. Jackson walked on one side of her, Chane on the other. Behind them came a delegation of 20 road warriors, all in their cuts, all silent and respectful. The courthouse hallway was packed with news crews. Cameras tracked Margaret's every step. Reporters shouted questions. Mrs. Matthews, how does it feel to finally get your day in court? Do you think justice will be served? What do you want to say to the squatters? Margaret stopped, turned to face the cameras, and spoke clearly. I want my home back, the home my husband built with his own hands, the home where we raised our children and welcomed our grandchildren. I want justice for Robert's memory. And I want these criminals to face consequences so they can never do this to another family. The courtroom itself was smaller than she'd expected. Judge Patricia Alvarez sat behind the bench, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked at the assembled crowd, at the road warriors filling the gallery, at the news cameras allowed inside for this proceeding, and nodded once. This court is now in session. Case number 77492, Matthews v. Sanderson and Brooks, emergency hearing regarding property possession and allegations of fraud. Derek and Crystal sat at the defendant's table with their attorney, Vic Brenner. Derek wore a suit that didn't fit right, looking like a child playing dress-up. Crystal had attempted to look respectable in a dress, but her leg bounced nervously under the table. Both had been released on bail the previous evening, the felony desecration charge, still pending separate criminal proceedings. Brenner stood, smoothing his cheap tie. Your Honor, this proceeding is highly irregular. My clients have been subjected to harassment, intimidation, and what amounts to a siege by a criminal motorcycle gang. They're the victims here. Judge Alvarez's expression didn't change. Mr. Brenner, are you aware that your clients are currently facing felony charges for desecration of human remains, that they have outstanding warrants in 3 states, that the lease agreement they presented has been determined to be fraudulent? Brenner's confidence faltered. Your Honor, those are separate matters that don't affect the civil proceedings regarding possession. On the contrary, they affect everything. Judge Alvarez turned to Chane. Mr. Morrison, please present your evidence. What followed was a masterclass in legal demolition. Chain presented county records showing Margaret as the sole owner of the property. Deed clear, taxes paid, no mortgages or liens. He showed the forged lease Derek had presented, then demonstrated how the notary stamp had been stolen from a Sacramento office 8 months prior. He displayed records proving the supposed landlord, Robert Davidson, didn't exist. No business license, no tax records, no person by that name owned property in Riverside County. Then, Chain presented the pattern. Photographs of 12 different properties across 4 states, court documents from previous eviction cases, testimonies from other victims, elderly people who'd lost months of their lives to Derek and Crystal's schemes. One woman had died of a stress-induced heart attack while fighting to reclaim her home. Her daughter had provided a victim impact statement that made several people in the gallery cry. These defendants are professional criminals who target the most vulnerable members of society, Chain said, his voice carrying moral weight. They specifically choose people who are grieving, elderly, or lacking resources to fight back. They forge documents, steal homes, and destroy lives. Margaret Matthews is simply the first victim who had the support necessary to fight back effectively. Judge Alvarez studied the documents, her expression growing colder with each page. Mr. Brenner, do you have any evidence to counter these findings? Brenner shuffled papers desperately. Your Honor, my clients maintain they entered into this lease in good faith. They were provided documents by someone they believed to be legitimate. They're victims of fraud themselves. Then who provided these documents? Judge Alvarez asked. Derek leaned forward, whispering urgently to Brenner. The lawyer nodded and stood. My client states he responded to an online advertisement. He met with a man claiming to be Robert Davidson, who showed him the property and provided the lease paperwork. My client paid first month's rent and security deposit in cash. How much? Chain asked. Derek hesitated, then said, $3,000. Chain pulled up bank records on his tablet. Your Honor, Mr. Sanderson's bank records show no cash withdrawal of that amount in the relevant time period. In fact, his account balance has never exceeded $800 in the past year. He's also claiming he paid rent to someone who doesn't exist for a property he somehow accessed while the owner was at her husband's funeral. The coincidental timing alone is damning. Judge Alvarez turned her attention to Derek. Mr. Sanderson, did you verify the identity of this supposed landlord? Did you check property records? Did you question why you were given access to a home that clearly showed signs of current occupancy? Derek's face flushed. I thought it was a good deal. A good deal, the judge repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. You thought you found a fully furnished house in excellent condition for $3,000 and didn't question it? I want to testify, Margaret said suddenly, standing from her seat in the gallery. Judge Alvarez nodded. Mrs. Matthews, please approach. Margaret walked to the witness stand with as much dignity as she could muster. Chain approached for direct examination. Mrs. Matthews, how long have you lived in the property located at 4723 Oak Ridge Drive? 50 years, Margaret said, her voice steady. My husband Robert and I moved in on June 15th, 1974. He built it himself. Spent 2 years working evenings and weekends, every board, every nail, every window. He built it for us. Can you describe what that home means to you? Margaret's voice wavered slightly. It's where we raised our 3 children, where Robert taught our son to ride a bike in the driveway, where our daughter had her wedding reception in the backyard, where we held our grandchildren for the first time. She looked directly at Derek. It's where Robert died, in our bedroom, in my arms, 6 days before these people stole it. The courtroom was silent except for someone in the gallery quietly crying. What did you find when you returned from your husband's funeral? Strangers living in my home. My belongings thrown in trash bags in the yard, Robert's Purple Heart lying in a puddle, 50 years of memories treated like garbage. Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. And when I tried to get help, I was told it was a civil matter, that I had to wait months to reclaim my own home, my husband's home. Chain pulled up photos on a screen. Are these accurate representations of how your belongings were treated? Margaret looked at the images of trash bags, scattered photos, broken china. Yes. And can you identify this item? Chain showed the video of Derek dumping Robert's ashes. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "That's my husband. That's Robert. This man dumped him in the dirt like trash." The gallery erupted in angry murmurs. Judge Alvarez banged her gavel. "Order!" Chain returned to his seat. "No further questions, Your Honor." Brenner approached for cross-examination, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. "Mrs. Matthews, isn't it possible you simply miscommunicated with my clients, that there was a misunderstanding about the property?" "A misunderstanding?" Margaret's voice rose. "Young man, I'm 72 years old, not senile. I know my own house. I know my own belongings. There was no misunderstanding. There was theft." Brenner retreated. "No further questions." Judge Alvarez looked at Derek and Crystal with open disgust. "Mr. Sanderson, Ms. Brooks, does either of you wish to testify in your defense?" Derek conferred with Brenner, then stood. "Your Honor, I swear we thought this was legitimate. We had a lease. We had keys. We didn't know the house was stolen." "You had keys because you changed the locks," Judge Alvarez said coldly. "You had a lease because you forged it, and you absolutely knew this home belonged to someone else, because their belongings were still inside when you moved in." She leaned forward. "I've seen many cases in my 20 years on the bench, but the calculated cruelty you displayed toward a grieving widow is beyond comprehension." She picked up her gavel. "Based on the overwhelming evidence of fraud, the clear ownership established by deed and documentation, and the criminal behavior demonstrated by the defendants, I'm issuing the following orders." The courtroom held its collective breath. First, immediate possession is granted to Margaret Matthews. The defendants have until 5 p.m. today to remove themselves and any personal property they brought to the residence. Any items belonging to Mrs. Matthews that remain in defendant's possession must be returned immediately. Derek's face went white. Second, I'm awarding Mrs. Matthews damages in the amount of $75,000 to cover property damage, emotional distress, and legal fees. Defendants are jointly and severally liable. Crystal made a choking sound. Third, I'm referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution on charges of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. The felony desecration charge is already pending. I'm recommending additional charges be filed. Judge Alvarez's gavel came down like thunder. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order prohibiting the defendants from coming within 500 feet of Mrs. Matthews or her property. Violation will result in immediate arrest. She looked at Derek and Crystal with contempt. You preyed on a widow in her moment of greatest grief. You violated the sanctity of her home and desecrated her husband's remains. I hope you face the maximum penalty for every charge filed against you. The gavel struck again. Court is adjourned. Sheriff's deputies will escort the defendants to retrieve their belongings under supervision. Mrs. Matthews, your home is yours, effective immediately. The gallery erupted. Road warriors cheered. News cameras captured every moment. Margaret collapsed into Chain's arms, sobbing with relief. Derek tried to speak to his lawyer, but Brenner was already packing his briefcase. I'm withdrawing from your case. Find another attorney. I won't be associated with this disaster. By 4:30 that afternoon, 3 sheriff's deputies supervised as Derek and Crystal loaded their belongings into a rental truck. They'd brought almost nothing when they moved in. Most of the items they tried to take actually belonged to Margaret. Deputies checked every box against an inventory list Chain had prepared. 600 bikers lined the street, silent and watchful. No one spoke. No one revved their engines. They just stood witness as justice was served. Crystal cried through the entire process. Derek's earlier arrogance had completely evaporated. He moved mechanically, avoiding eye contact with anyone, especially Margaret, who watched from her porch. At 4:57, Derek closed the truck's rear door. He climbed into the driver's seat while Crystal got in the passenger side. The engine started. That's when 3 unmarked vehicles pulled up, blocking the truck's exit. Detective Sarah Morales stepped out, badge displayed. Derek Sanderson and Crystal Brooks, you're under arrest for outstanding warrants in Nevada, Oregon, and Arizona, as well as new charges of fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and identity theft filed by the Riverside County District Attorney. Derek's head dropped to the steering wheel. Crystal screamed. The arrests happened right there on Oak Ridge Drive, in front of 600 witnesses and a dozen news cameras. Deputies read rights, applied handcuffs, and loaded both defendants into separate vehicles. As the patrol cars pulled away, 600 motorcycle engines roared to life in perfect synchronization. Not aggressive, not threatening, triumphant. Margaret stood on her porch, Jackson beside her, and watched justice roll away in the back of police cars. "Thunder's smiling," Jackson said quietly. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, he is. The house was hers again. The criminals were in custody. The battle was won. But the real work of healing was just beginning. The transformation began at dawn the next morning. Margaret woke in her own bed, sunlight streaming through windows that finally belonged to her again, and heard the rumble of engines outside. She pulled on her robe and walked to the front door. The street was full of pickup trucks, vans with equipment, bikers unloading supplies. Jackson stood in her driveway, coordinating like a general preparing for battle, except this battle was against grime, damage, and neglect. "Morning, Margaret," he called out. "Hope you don't mind, but we're about to make some noise." She stepped onto her porch and looked at the assembled crew. 50 people, maybe more, all wearing work clothes and determined expressions. Doc Williams carried a toolbox. Marcus had a paint sprayer. A woman Margaret didn't know wheeled a professional carpet cleaner up the driveway. "You don't have to do this," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, we do," Jackson said simply. "Thunder would have done the same for any of us. Hell, he did do the same. For most of us. Multiple times." A young biker approached, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm James, your grandson." Margaret gasped. She hadn't seen James in person for 2 years, just video calls and photos. He looked so much like Robert it hurt her heart. She pulled him into a fierce hug. "You started this," she whispered. "Your video, you saved me." "Grandpa always said family protects family," James said. "I just made sure his family heard the call." The work began in earnest. Teams split up with military efficiency. Jackson had organized everything the night before, assigning tasks based on skills and experience. Marcus led the structural team, examining walls, floors, and ceilings for damage. They found worse than expected. Derek and Crystal had punched holes in 2 walls. Water damage in the bathroom suggested plumbing issues they'd ignored. The back door frame was cracked, probably from being kicked open. "This is going to take more than a day," Marcus reported, "but we've got people. Rodriguez owns a construction company. Chen's a licensed electrician. We can handle it." Doc Williams headed the cleaning crew. She walked through each room with a clipboard, documenting everything. In the kitchen, they found roaches. The refrigerator held rotting food that made 2 people gag. Underneath the sink, someone had been storing chemicals that absolutely shouldn't be stored together. "This is a health hazard," Doc announced. "We're gutting this kitchen and starting over." But it was what they found hidden that made everyone's blood boil. In the attic, wrapped in trash bags, they discovered items Derek and Crystal had clearly planned to fence. Margaret's sterling silver flatware set, a wedding gift from her parents. Robert's collection of military challenge coins, some extremely rare. A jewelry box containing Margaret's mother's engagement ring, her grandmother's pearls, family heirlooms worth thousands in monetary value but priceless in sentiment. "They were going to sell it all," Chain said, photographing everything for the ongoing criminal case. "Probably waited to make sure the coast was clear before moving it." In the garage, beneath a tarp, they found Robert's tools. Not scattered like Margaret thought, but carefully hidden. A full mechanic's set, professional grade, worth at least $10,000. Derek had clearly known their value. "Son of a bitch," Jackson breathed, running his hand over a vintage torque wrench. "Thunder used this exact wrench to teach me how to rebuild an engine. I'd recognize it anywhere." They found evidence of drug activity, too. Burn marks on counters, residue in baggies, scales hidden in a bedroom closet. Chain documented everything, adding to the mountain of evidence the DA was building. But perhaps most devastating was what they found in Robert's workshop. Someone had spray painted over his meticulously organized pegboard, destroying the careful labels he'd made for each tool. They'd burned cigarettes into his handmade workbench, and they'd used his carefully maintained vise, the one he'd bought in 1976, as an ashtray. Margaret stood in the doorway of the workshop and wept. James held her while she cried for the casual cruelty of it all. "We'll fix it," Jackson promised. "Every single thing. I swear on Thunder's memory." By mid-morning, word had spread through the neighborhood. The people who'd been too afraid to help began emerging, guilt and relief warring on their faces. Mrs. Hernandez arrived with 3 containers of homemade tamales. "For the workers," she said, tears in her eyes. "Margaret, I'm so ashamed I didn't help you." "You were scared," Margaret said, taking her old friend's hands. "I understand." "No, I was a coward. Robert helped my family so many times. When my husband lost his job, Robert hired him to help with construction projects, paid him in cash so we could eat, and when you needed me, I drove away." Margaret pulled her into a hug. "You're here now. That's what matters." Mr. Patterson brought his lawn equipment and started working on the yard Derek and Crystal had let die. His teenage sons helped, raking and trimming while their father mowed in precise rows. The Kellys from the corner house showed up with painting supplies. "We saw what happened on the news," Mrs. Kelly said. "We should have done more. Let us help now." One by one, neighbors joined the effort. The same people who'd watched Margaret suffer alone for days now worked beside the bikers to restore her home. Some brought food, others brought supplies. A few just brought labor and apologies. By noon, the house was organized chaos. The kitchen had been completely emptied, every cabinet cleaned, new shelf liner being installed. The bathroom was stripped to the studs, new drywall going up. Carpets that couldn't be saved were torn out, revealing hardwood that could be refinished. A biker named Tommy, who owned a security company, installed a new system. "Top of the line," he explained to Margaret. "Cameras, motion sensors, direct link to the sheriff's department. No one's getting in here again without you knowing." Rodriguez, the construction company owner, examined the foundation and structure. "House is solid. Thunder built this right. Just needs some love and modern updates." He showed Margaret plans he'd sketched. "We can update the electrical, add insulation, maybe extend the back porch. All at cost, materials only." "I can't afford," Margaret began. "The club's covering it," Jackson interrupted. "We took donations, raised over $90,000, more coming in every day. This is happening, Margaret. You don't get a say." She tried to argue, but the words died in her throat. These people, most of whom she'd never met before 3 days ago, were rebuilding her life with their own hands. In the garage, something special was taking shape. Jackson had claimed this space as his personal project. He'd brought everything Thunder had owned that connected to the Road Warriors. The original club charter from 1973, signed by 12 founding members. Photographs spanning 5 decades. Robert's first motorcycle, which Margaret had kept covered in the garage, pristine and untouched. Jackson was building a memorial, a permanent tribute to the man who'd started it all. He restored Robert's workbench first, sanding away the damage, restaining the wood until it gleamed. He rebuilt the pegboard, recreating Thunder's label system from photographs. Each tool was cleaned, oiled, and returned to its proper place. On the main wall, he mounted a shadow box. Inside went the original Road Warriors charter, protected behind glass. Photographs surrounded it, chronologically arranged. Young Thunder on his first Harley. Thunder with the original 12 members. Thunder at charity rides, at funerals, at weddings. Thunder with Margaret, young and in love. Thunder with his children. Thunder with his grandchildren. A life captured in images. Above the shadow box, Jackson mounted a custom plaque, brass, professionally engraved. Robert Thunder Matthews, founder, Road Warriors Motorcycle Club, United States Marine Corps, builder, mentor, brother, father, friend. He gave second chances and built a family that spans generations. His legacy rides eternal. Below it, Thunder's original president patch, encased in glass, and beside that, his Purple Heart, recovered from the mud and now displayed with honor. James worked alongside Jackson, learning about the grandfather he'd known but never fully understood. "He never talked about the club much," James said, carefully hanging a photo. "I knew he rode, but I didn't know about all this. The charity work, the people he helped." "Thunder was humble," Jackson said. He didn't do good things for recognition. He did them because that's who he was. He looked at James carefully. You thinking about joining? James nodded slowly. If you'll have me. I want to carry on what Grandpa started. We'd be honored, but you need to understand this isn't a game. It's a commitment, a family. You prospect for a year, minimum, prove yourself, earn the patch. I understand, Jackson smiled. Then we'll talk to the chapter. But I think Thunder would have been proud. By evening, the house was unrecognizable. The kitchen gleamed with new appliances donated by a member who owned the appliance store. The bathroom was completely redone, modern and clean. Fresh paint covered every wall in colors Margaret had chosen. The hardwood floors were refinished, gleaming golden in the late afternoon sun. Her belongings, carefully cleaned and restored, were returned to their places. Photos back on the mantel. China back in the cabinet. Robert's medals, polished and mounted, displayed with pride. In the backyard, someone had planted new flowers, fixed the fence, rebuilt the deck where Margaret used to drink coffee with Robert every morning. The house was more than restored, it was honored. At 7 that evening, Jackson called for everyone's attention. The workers, neighbors, and road warriors gathered in Margaret's living room and spilling out onto the porch. We're going to have a church meeting, Jackson announced, right here, in Thunder's house, where it all began. The bikers formed up, creating a circle in the living room. Margaret stood in the center, confused and overwhelmed. Jackson pulled out his president's gavel, the same one Thunder had used 50 years ago. Margaret Matthews, Jackson said formally. Robert Thunder. Matthews founded the Road Warriors Motorcycle Club on August 12, 1973. He built this brotherhood on principles of loyalty, honor, and protecting those who can't protect themselves. For 50 years, he lived those principles every day. The room was silent except for the occasional sniffle from someone crying. You were his partner in all of it, Jackson continued. You supported him, loved him, stood by him through everything. You fed us, counseled us, opened your home to broken people Thunder was trying to fix. You were the heart of this club even if you didn't wear a patch. He held out a leather cut, not the one he'd given her before, but something older. Well-worn leather, the patches faded but still vibrant. On the back, Road Warriors MC, arched over First Lady with Thunder's road name embroidered below. Thunder had this made in 1975 for you. He kept it in his locker at the clubhouse, said someday you'd wear it, said when the time was right we'd make it official. Jackson's voice cracked. Margaret Matthews, on behalf of the Road Warriors Motorcycle Club, all 14 chapters, 637 members, were asking you to accept this position. Honorary lifetime member, First Lady of the Road Warriors. Will you accept? Margaret took the cut with trembling hands. She held it up, seeing Robert's handwriting on the inner lining. To my Margaret, my everything, love, Thunder. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I accept. The room erupted in cheers. Bikers stomped their feet, shouted approval, embraced each other and Margaret. Someone started chanting, First Lady, First Lady, and soon everyone joined in. Jackson helped Margaret put on the cut. It fit perfectly, like Robert had known exactly how she'd look in it decades before this moment. When the noise died down, Margaret raised her hand. I want to say something. The room fell silent. I didn't understand the club for a long time, Margaret began, her voice soft but steady. Robert would go on rides, attend meetings, disappear for weekends. I knew it made him happy, but I didn't understand why until this week. She looked around at all the faces watching her. Robert used to tell me, the Brotherhood protects family, always. I thought he meant just protecting each other, the members. But this week I learned he meant something bigger. You protected me. A woman most of you never met. You came from across the country. You fixed my home with your own hands. You gave me back my life. Tears streamed down her face. My husband built something extraordinary. Not just a motorcycle club, but a real family. The kind that shows up when you're broken. The kind that won't let you fall. The kind that keeps promises even after death. She pulled James close to her side. Robert's legacy isn't just in this house he built. It's in all of you. Every person he helped, every second chance he gave, every lesson he taught about honor and loyalty and doing right, even when it's hard. Margaret's voice grew stronger. Derek and Crystal thought they could take everything from me. They took my house, my belongings, my security, But they couldn't take what Robert really left behind. They couldn't take his brotherhood. They couldn't take his family. And they couldn't take the love that built all of this. She held up the cut. I'm honored to wear this. I'm honored to be part of Thunder's legacy. And I promise you, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure people know what you did for me. Making sure no one else goes through what I went through alone. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Jackson raised his fist. For Thunder! For Thunder! 600 voices echoed. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Margaret walked through each room. Her home, restored and protected. She stopped in the garage looking at the memorial Jackson had built. Robert's face smiled out from a dozen photographs. You kept your promise, she whispered to his picture. Even after you were gone, you protected me. Your family protected me. She touched the glass case holding his purple heart. I love you, Thunder. I'll love you forever. In her bedroom, the one she'd shared with Robert for 50 years, Margaret climbed into her own bed for the first time in over a week. Clean sheets that smelled like lavender, her pillows, her quilt, her sanctuary. She reached for her phone and pulled up the news. Derek and Crystal had been denied bail on the federal charges. They were facing minimum 15 years each, possibly more. The DA was pursuing maximum sentences, and the judge had agreed they were flight risks and dangers to the community. But more than that, the story had sparked something. State legislators were drafting new laws to protect property owners from squatters. 3 other victims of Derek and Crystal had come forward, their cases being reopened. A national organization was forming to help elderly victims of property fraud, with Margaret already confirmed as a speaker at their founding event. Robert's story, and hers, was changing things, making the world a little bit better, a little bit more just. Margaret set down her phone and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, James would start his prospect period with the Road Warriors. Tomorrow, she'd start volunteering at the legal aid office, helping other victims navigate the system. Tomorrow, she'd begin living again instead of just surviving. But tonight, she was home. In the house Thunder built, protected by the family Thunder created, wearing the cut Thunder made for her 50 years ago. Outside, she heard a motorcycle engine. Jackson and 10 others had set up camp in her driveway in the street, refusing to leave her alone for the first few nights, making sure she felt safe, making sure she knew she was protected. Margaret smiled and drifted off to sleep, Robert's urn back on the mantel where it belonged, his ashes finally at peace in the home he'd loved. The Road Warriors kept watch through the night, and somewhere Thunder was smiling.